Real parents, real stories. It's the Meet the Parents podcast.
Good evening and welcome to episode 12 of the Meet the Parents podcast and your weekly dose of parenting stories from our team of mums and dads. This week I'm once again joined by Dave, the dad venturer, and also Vicky from Verily Victoria Vocalisers. Good evening, both of you.
Good evening.
Hello.
So, for the next 30 minutes or so, we're each going to tell a tale from our parenting lives, providing a trio of perspectives from our respective families. So, for a change of pace, let's kick off with me. I want to talk about why it's no surprise that even close siblings are completely different, and actually why that's no bad thing. So, one of the comments I've become most accustomed to hearing about our three kids, but particularly the two boys, is about how similar they are. And while there's no mistaking from looking at them that they're clearly related, the reality is that you don't have to scratch too far beneath the surface to realise that they have very different personalities and styles, which leads me on to probably the second most common comment I hear from people, which is an expression of surprise at how different they are. In many ways I find this even more surprising. Why wouldn't they be? Unless you believe that nature counts for nothing in the whole nature versus nurture equation. Isaac and Toby are two different individuals, so of course they're going to be different in many respects. I'm constantly reminded that the boys are not just a bit different, but often 180 degrees removed from each other, no more so than during a recent trip that I wrote about with the boys, where they did an introductory session at an indoor climbing centre. Now, right from the beginning, the difference between Isaac and Toby made themselves apparent straight away. So Isaac was keen to give it a go, and he saw it as a challenge to overcome. Toby, on the other hand, had to be dragged out of the house with a combination of cajoling, bribery, and the threat of removing his Minecraft rights for the rest of the weekend. But once we'd actually got there, and the session started, Toby was up the walls in a flash, focused, fearless, and fast, basically like a miniature version of Spider-Man, which is, that's so typical of the way Toby approaches things. But Isaac, on the other hand, also reacted in a very typically Isaac sort of way. He was cautious and careful, measured and slow, but they were both brilliant. I don't know if you saw the photos, but some of the walls they were scaling were a good 12, 13 metres high, which when you're 8 or 6-year-old must seem like climbing up into the skies, but they both went for it, even though at times you could see Isaac visibly wrestling with himself to make himself push a little bit harder. But at the end of it, Isaac, despite having suffered a couple of minor setbacks that prevented him from reaching the top on his last couple of climbs, he was keen to do it again. But Toby, despite having pretty much mastered his walls, wasn't that bothered. And that's pretty typical of the way the boys are as well. When Isaac decides he's going to do something, he'll accept nothing less than 100% attainment, whereas Toby's a bit more, whatever, move on. And that's our boys for you. Isaac, who's totally driven to achieve anything he tries his hand at, and Toby, who's totally driven only by the one or two things that really interest him and can't be bothered about the rest, even if he's actually quite good at it. Isaac's our engineer. He chats non-stop. Toby's very much the ideas man who regularly withdraws into his own little world. So, while Isaac goes methodically from A to B to C, Toby bounces randomly around, and if the two of them were characters in the Lego movie, Isaac would be very much Emmett, cautiously adhering to the instructions, while Toby would be much more of a, almost like a wild style, or, a master builder who's creative and a bit more reckless. And, in broad strokes, I think Isaac's very much like my wife, while Toby is a lot more like me. So they really are like yin and yang. Sometimes it means they clash, but mostly they complement each other brilliantly. And when they do play or do some other activity together, Isaac's the one who plans things out, and he role models rules and behaviours based on real life experiences or things he's seen on TV. He's brilliant at bringing in detailed observations and a sense of organisation. And then Toby's the one who comes up with the little flashes of creativity that take play in delightfully unexpected directions. And together they achieve more than they ever would on their own, simply by approaching the same situation from completely different angles. And personally, I think that's brilliant. With you guys, do you find that Elle and Grace take after one or the other of their parents in particular, or are there any ways in which they're different to both of you?
I think especially the last 2 weeks we've started to see her become more of an independent toddler, so we're recognising the tantrums, which obviously that's the missus, isn't it? And we're seeing her want more things, as in she knows what she wants and she's, asking for it in her own way. So it's difficult to sort of see these, like I say, these behaviours, what's me and what's Hayley at the moment. But I think as she gets older, that'll be something that'll come out that little bit more. I think just, what you were talking about with your boys is a little bit like me and my brother. So he's 15 months younger than me, and even though we're really similar in some things, we're totally the opposite in the other. I just find it crazy how parents can do the same thing with both kids and they turn out to be totally different.
Yeah, so did you find that your parents treated you and your brother differently as a result of the ways that you did diverge?
I think we were always sort of made to do things together to an extent, because I guess it was, face the world together when you went and did, say, like sports things on half term or things along those lines. But his interests were very different to mine, so I guess in a way he probably wasn't catered for when it comes to the experiences and in his interests until he was that little bit older, if that makes sense.
And did you find that the differences between you brought you closer together, or did they cause more clashes between you?
It was more clashes as we were younger. So my brother's gay and I was the first person he came out to. I think he was about 14, and I think that whole experience and me supporting him and then him coming out to my mum and dad and everything brought us closer together.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say, because with myself and my brother, now the age difference between us is bigger. He's nearly 6 years younger than me. We're quite different in personality as well, and for quite a long time we really clashed. We struggled to get on together, probably until he was in his teenage years, I guess, and after that and since then we've become much closer. But you don't appreciate the differences between you in those early years, and you come to appreciate them a bit more in later life. But Vicky, how about Grace? I mean, do you find that she takes after yourself or her father more in any particular way?
I have to say I'm noticing more as she gets older how much she compares to me. I mean, she's 9 now, 9.5 nearly, and she's a bit stubborn like me, and she never likes to admit she's wrong like me. So yeah, there's quite a lot of similar character traits starting to come out, and I think you have to be very careful, because there's certain ways that you act that they start to emulate, and you don't know that they're doing it until they start to do it. And I'm not saying all of those things are a bad thing, She's got other traits where she's really kind to people, and I try to make sure I'm like that as well. She's one of those people, if she's doing something, she needs a kick up the backside. For example, she's learning the piano, and we have to remind her constantly, and she's quite forgetful, which I am. But it's funny because even though Ross isn't her biological father, there's a lot of traits coming out in her that actually are like him as well. Her sense of humour, her sarcasm. There's things that she's picked up from him, and there are traits of her father in there too. So yeah, it's interesting what makes up a person.
I think that's where it's interesting with the whole nature versus nurture thing as well, isn't it? Going back to me and my brother again, raised in the exact same way. Obviously there were slight differences, but what is it that creates that person? How can they have so different outlooks on life? I'm a saver, for instance, when it comes to money, but my brother is more than happy just to splurge everything. And how can that totally different behaviour both come from the same set of parents when you've been raised in the same way? It's so strange.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm one of 7 children, and I'm
Really?
the eldest. Yeah, I'm the eldest, and it's quite. There's 13, 14 years between me and my youngest brother, and I sort of was more like his mum in the end and his sister. But it's quite interesting because we're all very different personalities, and as you rightly say, it's nature versus nurture as well. Because who's to say that Ross would influence Grace in the way he has, in the way she's growing up now? So it's quite interesting. And we've never dumbed down her language either. So I think she's got quite an older vocabulary. So I think it just depends on how you act around them, and also what they pick up from you personality-wise.
It must be. I mean, it's a fascinating contrast with your family as well, isn't it, Vicky? I mean, you've got, there are elements of nature that she's picked up from her biological father, but then increasingly, as you're saying, she's picking up much more of the nurture side of things from Ross. So it's interesting to see how that changes over time and how she follows yourself and Ross as much as anything. I find it fascinating. I think that, and often that kids seem to be much better at accepting the differences between them and their siblings at face value. Certainly that's the case with our boys. They just seem to get it and they get on with it. But often by the time we're grown up, we've taught ourselves to believe that, it's our way or the highway, that what anyone else does is different and therefore inferior. I think when that happens, that's pretty sad. And, maybe sometimes we'd be much better off thinking like our children. Now, Vicky, we all know that parenting is a never-ending succession of challenges. And as you've discussed previously on the podcast, you've had to deal with more than your share of both opportunities and setbacks recently. But you're going to talk here about one of those awkward little moments that many parents dread that you tackled with Grace a few months ago. So why don't you talk us through that?
Yes, I wrote a post back in January about discussing puberty with Grace. And I did something similar to her that my mum did to me, in the fact that just before her 9th birthday, I told her I had something very important to discuss with her. Now, I can remember my mum doing that to me, and it made me feel really important. And I wanted her to feel the same way and the same sort of feelings and trust towards me as I did towards my mum. So my mum at the time discussed periods with me and body changes and what I could expect, but she never discussed the sex side of things. As a result of how she handled it, I felt I was able to talk to her about anything. And so, ever since Grace was really little, I've had to be really honest with her, because obviously for a part of that time I was living as a single parent, so up until she was 4 I was mainly on my own with her. So she would, obviously, as kids do, come into the toilet with me. As a result of that, I never could hide anything from her, and I never would. So she would notice if I had my period, for example. So I explained to her what it was. I didn't lie and say, oh, it's nothing or anything like that. I was very open and explained that ladies bleed every month. So then I ordered a book prior to talking to her about it all. And it's called What Is Happening to Me? And it's an Usborne book, which I really like. I think they put them in really good explanatory words and good pictures as well. So it had things like your facts of life, but I didn't cover the sex side. All I covered was things like your breasts getting bigger, periods, and sanitary towels and tampons and the difference between the two things, and mood swings and spots and all these things. And so as a result of that, we sat down, we went through the book over a weekend. And, she had a few concerns and she felt that she was able to ask me about them. And even with Ross as well, because in the evening of the first day that we started to speak about this, I nipped out to go and get a takeaway, and Ross and Grace were going to start watching some wrestling, but when I got back they were sitting on the sofa having a chat. And so I went into the kitchen to lead them to it. And then later on, Grace had actually said to Ross, I'd like you to be patient with me because I'm going to start getting moody and I'm probably going to slam my door. And Ross said, I completely understand. You'll probably call me lots of names and tell me I'm not your real dad and probably stomp off. So apparently she thought about this for a moment and she said, I will try really hard not to do that, but if I do, I'm very sorry and I don't mean it. So I think it's really worked. I think it's important. And actually, also the other thing that Grace said to Ross was, I'm a bit worried about my periods. And Ross said to her, look, I'm not a girl. I do know about them, but you're better off talking to your mum about things like that because she really understands it. And she actually turned around to him and said, I'm really lucky to be able to talk to my mum about all of this, aren't I? And I feel sad for the girls who can't. So I was really pleased to hear that my plan that my mum followed for me worked for her.
It's great that she was able to approach and talk about the subject in such an open and mature manner. Yeah. And I guess the discussion with boys is perhaps a little bit different insofar that they just tend to turn into grunting, smelly teenagers who never want to speak to anyone again. Can either of you remember how you learned about the facts of life or the birds and the bees or any of the many other wonderful names and euphemisms that we have for, what is ultimately, an entirely natural set of human functions?
Yeah, so I can. I think I was about 7, and I don't know where we were, but for whatever reason we was in a car park. And I remember with my mum and dad, we've just had a very open, honest relationship all throughout life, which Hayley's always found a little bit strange because her family are a lot more closed. So me, my mum and dad and my brother will joke about sex and joke about dogging and just, loads of random things because that's just the relationship we have. So when I was about 7, I remember mum and dad just telling me about it in a very sort of factual way, not going into loads of detail, but enough to understand the concepts. And then I remember going to school, and it was something where there was only me and a couple of other people who knew anything about sex. And then, as you get older, you get the classes, I can't remember what they're called, the classes you have when you're at secondary school and things like that. But to me, it should come from the parents, and you should be able to have that relationship, as it sounds like you've got, Victoria, about just being able to talk about all of the basic fundamental things and be there to be the sounding board and answer any questions to alleviate any concerns.
Absolutely. I think it's so important, and I was quite shocked actually because the post at the time had quite a few comments on it from other bloggers who actually said that their parents didn't do that with them, or they felt like they couldn't talk about things like that, and I found it quite sad.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think there's part of it is a generation thing, and I'd like to think that, I'm 30 now, nearly 31. I'd like to think that my generation's a little bit more open when it comes to that, and you'd then hope that when Elle is, 20, 25, 30, then it would be something in society where it's even more open, especially when there's things like STIs and everything, which is becoming a lot more commonplace. To me, it's the more information you've got and the more information that's out there, the better for everybody to make decisions.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Dave. I think it definitely helps that we are now part of a generation that is much more open about talking about topics that used to be kind of fairly taboo. I mean, puberty and sex weren't really things my parents ever discussed with me either. In truth, I found out about a lot of it in, school lessons, whatever it was they called the classes. It had some wonderfully euphemistic name to it, didn't it? But yeah, hopefully we'll recognise the right moment when it comes with our kids, and we'll be able to have a proper talk about it rather than, relying on the soft porn mag that one of the more brazen kids in the class will always sneak in. And yeah, it's interesting, Vicky, that you've had this initial talk about puberty with Grace aged 9. He's only a year or so younger, and I'm already trying to picture having the same sort of talk with him, but in what could potentially be less than a year's time. And like I was saying, I guess with boys it's perhaps not quite as urgent, as puberty tends not to hit until a later age. But at the same time, as uncomfortable as the thought makes me sometimes, I would like his first lesson about puberty and sex to come from us and done properly and in an open way.
I just can say, I think that's the danger in the world nowadays, when kids have got phones and access to the internet and all of this stuff, that they're going to find things out earlier than we ever did, and also have a warped view on the likes of sex because of the availability of finding porn and things. I don't know whether you saw it, but there was a documentary, I think on Channel 4 sometime last year, where they went into a school and they were talking to kids around sex and porn and the unrealistic view that both boys and girls have of things you see in porn. That's the danger that we're in a bit nowadays, where we've almost got to preempt that type of stuff, because otherwise our kids might find out things that either they're not ready to, or there isn't a filter that we'd like in place.
Yeah, and in a strange sort of way, if the danger of this kind of thing happening promotes parents having an earlier and more open discussion with kids about things like sex, then that's probably so much the better. I mean, when I grew up as a teenager, it was the mid-80s, when sex on TV, or the availability of any kind of sexual information, was much less open than it was now.
It went as far as Samantha Fox, I think, didn't it?
Yeah, and I remember at the time all the fuss over Channel 4 showing foreign language, effectively very, very soft core films with the red triangle in the corner, which of course was just an open invitation for every teenager to watch it. And that was the era as well of AIDS, when a lot of talk about sexuality became, very repressed almost. But now it's a very different environment, and hopefully it is something that for our generation is much easier than it was for our parents and grandparents once. So hopefully we'll all be having the talk with our kids sooner rather than later, and in a way that doesn't attach any kind of stigma to it.
I agree, and I think it's important actually that, as Dave was saying, I think it's important that parents do this. I mean, kids pick up things from each other and they can get misinterpreted or not really understood. And if Grace ever gets that at school, I want her to be able to come home to me and say, "Mum, I heard this today. Could you explain it to me? Or is this true?"
All any of us want as parents is to be able to have an open relationship with our kids where they feel that they can communicate and talk to us about anything that's on their minds. And, issues relating to sex should be no different to issues around bullying or trouble they're having with particular subjects at school or anything else, really. So we probably ought to treat it just the same as we treat anything else.
CBeebies is proud to bring you a brand new motoring show for toddlers, Tot Gear. Like Top Gear, but with more grown-up presenters, fewer tantrums, and including new features such as Child in a reasonably priced Little Tykes car, and My Dad's Car's Better Than Your Dad's Car. Set your Skybox or PVR to Series Link now.
Now, Dave, the parenting experience you've chosen to talk to us about tonight could perhaps be called a case of toilet humour. On that note, I'll just hand it over to you.
Yeah, I think we've had some good conversations, so it's probably about time I brought it down a couple of notches, isn't it? So yeah, the topic that I was going to talk about was a blog post I wrote early in the year about entertaining a toddler when you're on the toilet. So rather than necessarily talk about it, I thought what I'd do is read my intro to it and then mention the 4 points which I'd like to think are advice for any parent, which are within the post, and then we can take it from there, I guess. So, I'm not going to lie, the topic of this particular blog post is probably going to make one or two of you a little uneasy. It shouldn't, as it's completely normal and we all do it, but I'm pretty sure that the more prudish among you probably prefer to keep your private habits exactly that, private. That rule doesn't really apply to me though, as I'm occasionally guilty of oversharing and accused of talking crap. This is definitely one of those times, as today I'm writing about how to entertain your toddler when you're on the toilet. Don't pretend that it's not an issue, it most certainly is. It's one of those things that no one tells you about prior to becoming a mum or dad. Instead, you've just got to learn about it as you figure out how to parent. I don't know about you, but when nature calls, I've just got to answer that metaphorical phone, particularly after I've had my morning coffee. In the early days, I tried to wait for the sprog's nap time and work around her, but when you're turtle heading, you've got to do something about it. I'll admit it felt very wrong doing my business in front of toddler Elle. I'm not used to an audience when I go about doing my thing, and I'm sure that it's not the most pleasant of experience for the sprog, but needs must. Therapy in the future should help her resolve some of the issues I'm currently implanting in her tiny head anyway. Over time, though, I've come to accept that I occasionally need to have a dump as eyes watch on, probably a realisation that the stars from Two Girls One Cup soon came to as well. Although it's not ideal for either of us, it's the lesser of two evils. I have the option of leaving toddler Elle downstairs on her own, or bringing her upstairs and confining her to the bathroom with me. Considering that social services would call the former neglect, I have very little option but to implement the latter. It may sound odd and a little crass, but I found out that there's a number of ways to entertain the toddler when you're curling one out. With a little bit of creativity, it's possible for your kid to partake in fun and educational activities as you sit on the throne. Here's a few favourites from the Dadventurer household. I think that's the fundamentals of what I'm trying to get at with this post. So let me mention the 4 things that I came up with. The first one is Jenga. So toddler Elle loves playing with toilet rolls. So what I found is if you give her all of the toilet rolls in the bathroom, she'll just sit there happily stacking them on top of each other, and you can do what you need to do. The second one is fetch. So what I found is if you get an item that she's interested in the bathroom, throw it out into the hallway and she'll go run after it and then bring it back. And, you can continue that for a good couple of minutes. The third one is soft play in inverted commas, because the bathroom isn't really the softest place with all of the sharp edges and things like that. But there's plenty of places for her to climb. She can climb on the sink, she can get in the bath, she can get in the shower. So I think that's pretty decent. And then the last one is human buckaroo. So what Elle does at the moment is she will take everything out of the drawers and out of the baskets we've got in the bathroom and either put them on my lap or put them in my boxer shorts as they're down by my ankles. So there we go. That's my 4 suggestions on how to entertain the toddler when you're on the toilet. Fire away.
Now, I know, Dave, you've covered a lot of the content of the post already, but I will suggest to listeners that if you haven't read the original post, you really should do. Not least for the header photo that accompanies it. Now, you can ignore the sight of Dave's naked leg. Now, thankfully, no more than that is revealed, but it's the look in Elle's eyes as she gazes up at the camera. You know, in the Shrek film, that wide-eyed pleading look that Puss in Boots has? That's it. On a more serious note, I guess this is just one example of a number of the types of situations that single parents have to face on a daily basis, and even for those of us who share the parenting burden with a partner. You know, so speaking for myself, there have certainly been times when I've had 2 or even all 3 of our kids to myself and had to deal with, with one of them requiring the urgent dash to the toilet while out shopping or something, usually in the middle of a restaurant meal, actually. And there've certainly been plenty of times when we've had to avail ourselves of the disabled toilet just so I can keep everyone together in one place. And am I the only parent who sleeps naked, has got up in the middle of the night or got out the shower in the morning and encountered their daughter laughing and pointing at Daddy's willy? I really bet I'm not.
No, you're not.
About 2 weeks ago, I had an instant where I was going to the toilet and she decided to yank on my scrotum, which was fun. And then the other day, I had the situation where she decided to try and grab my stream as I was having a wee, and then she soon realised that wasn't particularly fun as her hands got wet.
Vicky, have you ever found yourself having to compromise your own privacy or having to resort to distracting Grace in a, let's call it, a creative way while you attend to something urgent?
Not that I can recall. I mean, there was occasions if I needed to go to the toilet and she was being a nightmare where I'd just tell her to bring a book and sit on the floor.
That's a better way than any of mine, actually. I should have thought of that. Let's add that as number 5.
I think I was just so used to it because living on my own, and I just thought, what choice have I got, really? There's no one else to leave her with while I need to go off to nip to the toilet. And of course, at some, through certain stages when they're younger, they just want to be with you. They don't want to leave your side. And if I shut the door on her and shut her out, it would just make it 10 times worse. It was just easier to let her come in and sit on the floor. Not that I always wanted her there, because sometimes I just wanted to get to the toilet. You want to shut the door and just everybody go away for a while. But you can't do that when you're on your own. I think I'm trying to remember it because I've never shied away from anything with her, and I think also I used to sleep with nothing on. I still do, and it doesn't bother me. And I'd wander around, and it would just be a natural thing for her. I think it's different when it's Grace and Ross. He's much more he covers himself up now, and she used to laugh, and now she just doesn't. And it's funny because as she's got older as well, she's more embarrassed about people seeing her body. She doesn't want anyone to see. She covers up or shuts the door. Whereas when she was a bit younger, it'd be just yeah, here you go, this is me.
Yeah, there is definitely a point at which they become old enough not just to be conscious about what's going on around them and what people are doing or wearing or whatever, but also, as you say, what they're doing and wanting their own privacy a little bit more. I know I've certainly had enough instances where I've locked the bathroom door and there'll have been one of the children hammering on the door, and then the conversation usually goes along the lines of, "Daddy, can I come in?" "No." "Daddy, can I come in?" "No."
Yeah.
"Daddy, can I come in?" "Go away." And of course, what I haven't said is that I've been recording this entire podcast while sitting on the toilet, which is why we don't do video podcasts. So, before we go, any other business? What have you guys been up to this past week or so?
As anybody who follows me knows, and I think as I probably mentioned on the podcast last week, we've been having our garden landscaped, so that's been taking up a lot of my time, both in terms of normal stuff of just living life as well as doing blog stuff. So I've been blogging and vlogging about that as a slightly different thing to my parenting stuff. That's about it really. That garden got finished last week, so we've been enjoying that this weekend, and we actually met up with Amy today, who doesn't live too far, so we had a Meet the Parents podcast in real life today.
Should have got you to record it.
I was going to say that.
How about you, Vicky?
Yeah, Grace has been away on a school residential trip this last week for 2 nights. Came back with the same pair of socks on as she had when she went away. So I wasn't impressed with that. But yeah, it's been really strange because normally if she's away, she's with her father. But this last week it was with the school. It was quite nice because they were keeping us updated on Twitter so we could see some photographs of what they were up to. And so that meant more time for me and Ross to catch up with some work. I've been quite busy dealing with a new book company who've asking a load of bloggers to come on board. So I've been dealing with that. And then today we went for a trip down to West Bay, which was beautiful. I've lived here for nearly 3 years, in Somerset that is, and never been. And it's only 25 minutes up the road. We will certainly be back. That was probably the best fish and chips we've ever had. Same with the ice cream as well. And we just had a great time.
Excellent. So, not that much new here, actually. So, with just a couple of weeks to go before I move from my current job into my new one, I'm in that odd transition period where I'm not so much between jobs as just doing 2 jobs at the same time. Yeah, I am hugely excited though. As I wrote in a post last week, I wouldn't have landed this new job if I hadn't made the decision 9 years ago to start a blog and resultantly got involved in social media in the way that bloggers do. So, it's funny sometimes how great things can appear from out of nowhere if you just keep going at something you love. And that's it for this episode of the Meet the Parents podcast. We'll be back next week as usual, but in the meantime, here is where you can find the 3 of us online.
I am www.thedadventure.com. I don't know why it needed the www then, but I put it in. And on Twitter at @the_dadventure.
I vlog as Verily Victoria Vocalises. URL is vevivos.com, and I'm on Twitter at Vic Welton.
And I'm at slouchingtowardsThatcham.com, and I'm on Twitter at ThatchamDad. So you can download this podcast on iTunes and on Android devices, on our website at meettheparentspodcast.com, and via a variety of podcasting apps. And do please give us a follow on Twitter at Parents Podcast and Facebook at facebook.com/meettheparentspodcast. So thanks very much for listening to this episode, and do please join us again next week. Good night.